This is the Amp Hour Podcast, released November 26th, 2017. Episode 369. An interview with Jason Huggins. Welcome to the Amp Hour. I'm Chris Gamble of Contextual Electronics.
Oh, that's me. That's my cue.
That's you, man. Can we get a robot Jason in here? We need a robot. Can someone get a robot to push the button for Jason?
Can we automate this? Let me get my tape player here. This is Jason. I'm Jason Huggins, the founder of Tapster Robotics.
Welcome, Jason. How you doing?
I'm good.
Coming to you live from all the way across Chicago. Jason and I do live in the same city, but not really. I mean, Chicagoland's pretty big, so we're not in the same spot.
Nope, we're not. I'm over all the way on the other side of town.
The other side of the Blue Line, really. So yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, I live close to the airport. He lives close to the other end of the Blue Line. So people who have been here will know what that is. And I should also mention, for people that are listening up front, we will be having a meetup, 3H, which is the local hardware meetup. Hardware Happy Hour is on Tuesday, I think starting about 7 downtown. So there's a link in the show, and Jason might even be there. Someday I'll get there.
Yeah,
right. We started
my show and tell was like my favorite subject in school, and like that's pretty much what that is. And so I it's embarrassing I haven't been there yet.
Right, less beer in school though, right? I mean, like that's
true.
Yeah.
From what I can remember,
that sounds like something you'd be interested in. I remember you and I hung out in like a German restaurant, and you just like had a bunch of robots. It was me and you and Kat, and you were just like, there was beer and sausage all around and robots on the table, you know?
And this was in San Francisco, I believe.
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
Right. Those things happen more often at random German sausage restaurants in San Francisco than it does in Chicago.
Well, we only have like a couple German restaurants here, so that's why. Yeah. So tell us, how did you get here? Why are we talking right now? I should mention that your Twitter handle is what I sometimes refer to you as. So it's Hugs on Twitter.
Yes. So Hugs on Twitter.
Right. So if people hear me say that, I sometimes gets confusing looks. So.
Right, and it's I would like to say it's it makes sense because my last name is Huggins.
Yes.
2 G's. But hopefully it's not awkward that it's just a random guy who goes by Hugs.
Right.
I'm more of a fist bump guy, actually. So if you see me, just, you don't have to give me a hug. But or
you still might get one. Just
right. I do have a funny story with the president involved hugs and fist bumps, but that's a story for another day.
No, I definitely want to hear that too. Yeah.
But yeah.
Maybe you can work that in as your chronological working your way up to now. So you come from the software world.
I do. So I think our paths I think kind of overlap in that sense. If you were, I think I've seen you describe this with contextual electronics in the sense of maybe the biggest nerve that you struck, I suppose, as far as people finding your content is software people trying to get into electronics. I think if I'm characterizing things correctly.
At least if I haven't struck that nerve, that's what I'm going for.
Right. And I am one of those people. That's a software person desperately trying to get into electronics. I think I've been slowly but rapidly making progress since around the turn of the century, which is now a phrase that seems like actually that year that was a long time ago.
It is.
Some people who listening to this were born in the turn of the century.
That's a child going to college next year. Like
yeah. But ever since around 2000 I've got a lot of ideas that needed motors and LEDs and all kinds of stuff, and so I've been trying to figure out how to make those things work. But so in that sense, we have similar interests. But I can't remember exactly how the first kind of conversation happened, other than me just like heckling you about how long your YouTube series was for getting to Blinky. I don't know if I just reached out to you and said, "Hey,
yeah."
I don't know if I just reached out to you and said, "Hey, dude, make this shorter," or if there was some other.
It was probably, let's just say generically Twitter. That's probably the easy way to say it.
It might have been that. It might have started from a Twitter heckle and then, went from there.
Yes. So prior to hardware, though, so you were JavaScript, is that right? Other stuff? I remember front end something.
So, I mean, my favorite programming languages are Python and JavaScript. These days, all my stuff is mostly JavaScript. I do like I could go down a rabbit hole just talking about all the different stuff. I actually try to keep The JavaScript I do, like browser based, keep that pretty like vanilla and simple. I use and also I'm making like user interfaces for controlling my little robotic arms. So I'm not using whatever the kids are into these days, like Angular or React or all these other kind of things for making web apps.
Yes,
I'm using mostly 3.js for 3D stuff, and I'm blanking out of the name of the SVG, but the 2D graphics I'm using SVG under the hood, and then that talks to JavaScript running. Well, I can go down the whole stack, but I'm a big fan of Johnny 5 is the library I use that controls the Arduino and it's all JavaScript. But my background before that was did a lot of Python. If I'm on startup number 2 with Tapster, my previous company, Sauce Labs, still going on, still going strong. It's awesome. It was buzzword compliant for 10 years ago. It was cloud computing.
Oh yeah. Check.
Whatever. No, it's an amazing, awesome thing, and it was all written in Python. And before that, I was at Google doing a similar thing, doing web testing infrastructure, things like that. But I mean, purely software job. And I've always had dreams of getting into hardware and electronics, and so now I am.
Right. So, and people who are front end compliant, they would know like Selenium. Is it Selenium or Selenium? I don't know how you say it.
Right. So yeah, I started the Selenium project in 2004 or so. I've been told I pronounce it incorrectly, especially people with a British accent. I think the way we kind of thread the needle here is the element is Selenium, but the software testing tool for browser automation is called Selenium. That's the way. Yeah. Anyway,
nice to differentiate, right?
Right. Yeah. But I think that's the thing I'm internet famous for. Or the way I like to joke, if it was Andy Warhol has that quote of "In the future, everyone will be famous for 15 minutes." Mm-hmm. I'm famous to 15 people.
All right. Yeah.
So I'm a nano celebrity.
Knowing you by name. Yeah. No, that sounds familiar. When all of our wonderful listeners come up to me at meetups or something like that, they're like, "Oh, the Amp Hour." I'm like, "Yay, one person, awesome."
Right.
I love it. Yeah. So that's great, man. Yeah. And that probably leads into the fist bump with the president. That was an often. You actually worked with the president.
Well, yeah. So he had a website that didn't launch so well a couple of years ago, and if you read the Congressional Oversight Committee report, because as you do, one of the what do you call it, the report that needs to get written after some horrible thing. One of the chapters in that was like testing or lack thereof, or all the different things. Right.
And this is healthcare.gov for people who didn't put that together. And that was Obama, not the current president. Yes.
Someone listening to this from 100 years from now. Right. What's a website?
Right.
But yeah. So for 2 months of my life, all of November and December 2013, I always have to clarify. I started helping after it launched, not before. Right. And then actually I plugged in again 6 months later when they were working on version 2. I think like the whole experience there was, I felt like I was a fire alarm installer in the middle of a firefight. At least the first time around. Right, I was like, man, I would have been way more effective and more useful 6 months earlier. Right. And so plugging in 6 months later, it helped to have that context of the firefight. So kind of like, no, hey, flames go.
Everything's on fire.
Right. Or like, do this to prevent that horrible thing from happening. Right. But I did feel like I felt like I got more, not done. I mean, there were some awesome things that we did that first time around, but I felt the contribution was more substantial, whatever you want to call it, that second time. Mm-hmm. I mean, if nothing else, I kind of figured like I wanted to stick around to make sure that they did like the second launch in the next year. Right. Like,
you're like
actually,
are you actually
horrible.
Doing this? Right. I didn't give up my holiday time just for funsies, right?
Right. So it was kind of like enlightened self-interest to see that it survived launch year number 2. Anyway, yes. Yeah. So I have this software background. And I do hope that my particular skill set is not a required, of national importance like that ever again. I hope it just stays kind of just a boring, useful skill.
Sure. Well, one thing I really liked is I remember one of the first times you and I met, you had told me about like I think it was your analogy, but if not, then it was someone else sitting with us. But it was like testing is kind of like garbage collection, right? Like in the real, like being a garbage man. Like it's not super glorious, it's not like the top job, but damn, you notice when it doesn't happen, right? It's like
Right.
One of
I'm
those
not
things.
sure if I've used that. I'm not sure if I use garbage collection.
I'm trying to say you're a garbage man, Jason. I'm just.
I have nothing against the sanitation, engineers of the world.
Right.
But it is something kind of like the utility company or something like that. You don't notice it until it's not there.
And people will always pay for it too. That's the other thing. Is that like when people figure out that like the issues that causes when you don't have it, that there's actually a business model behind it. That's the real thing that I think about.
So there is a certain level. We did not go down this path with the previous startup, but there is a certain level of like you're kind of like selling insurance, or it's kind of like if you watch like an ADT home burglary prevention.
Yeah, right. You're selling FUD.
Or they're selling fear, right? It's like they're buy this thing or else this bad thing will happen. And testing is kind of like that. It's you're trying to prevent this bad thing from happening, meaning like you put something out there in the world and it's broken and you're losing revenue by the minute, or users or reputation, all kinds of stuff like that. And the problem is when you talk to two kids in a garage working on their startup, they haven't had that massive failure yet.
Right.
And so they're like, testing, whatever.
Especially at scale, right? Like
Right. But like, big companies where they've had that embarrassing outage, then two things happen after that 3 a.m. outage. A massive budget opens up for testing and for monitoring.
Right. Yep.
And if it's not there, it's like, okay, well, we'll follow up in a year or two. Anyway.
Yeah. No, I remember that from manufacturing places I worked at. It's like, oh, well, we can't get another test stand. And it's like, and then like a couple products go out that just didn't get tested or got, kind of shuffled through. And it's like, oh, what do you know? Got a new test stand.
So it is interesting though, coming from the software world going into electronics and hardware, that it does feel like the electronics world does take it more seriously. Like, I mean, everything coming off an assembly line, like, you would be laughed out of the room if you said like quality control, like, what's that? Like, oh, we don't test our boards. So there's a certain level of like, you don't just pay it lip service, I guess.
Sure. But I guess that depends on the industry too, right? So like a large scale consumer product might have like a built-in self-test, but it's not going to get, it's not doing full calibration. Like when I was at test equipment company, right? That was a huge piece of it was the calibration setup.
Right. I mean, it's all relative and very specific to the particular case. But but it is interesting. Just how do I say this? I used to just always wanted to do electronics. Like I didn't know how or where to get into it, but I knew I wanted to do something there. And meanwhile, I had this software career that became kind of I had this specialty in testing tools and test automation. And I almost like I was on this path toward like a midlife crisis. Like I'm going down this one direction. I want to go in a completely 180 over here. And what I didn't realize though is that one, like hardware is becoming more software, or at least the practices are becoming, software practices are becoming more common in hardware. But the other thing is like testing is a activity that happens in both of those. So it's nice that I've been able to make that switch by being in this testing world, and it ended up not being a diversion. It ended up being kind of like a cool prerequisite of sorts to get my foot in the door, if you will.
Right. Well, and I think too the timing was really apt with the rise of touchscreens and everything like that too. It's just that there were some solutions, but the ultimate thing is that you needed a finger to basically enact a bunch of apps.
Right. I imagine anyone who's listening to this and has no idea who I am. Right. They're probably like, what is?
Maybe it's time to say what Tapster is. Yeah.
Right. So it's
15 minutes, right? Yeah.
There you go. Yeah. Like what the hell? I make a little robot, and it's like a little robotic finger that taps buttons on phones. It tests. You can use it for testing touchscreens. So touchscreens are like everywhere now. So they're in cars, they're on phones, they're in all kinds of places. And so I make a little robot for testing that.
And so that has changed a bit too. So what rev are you on? I don't even know. I haven't seen you in a while. I don't know. What rev of robot are you on?
Oh, I should probably, I need to go back and watch my Iron Man movies and just have follow that naming convention. Mark 15, Mark 16.
Right.
I don't know
at what point. Are you at the 15, 16?
I don't know at what point he achieved flight with his boots, but
yeah.
I mean, my first robots were made out of basswood, laser cut basswood. I moved away from those. That was a long time ago. Uh-huh. Yes, you can start a robotics company making your robots out of wood. Just kind of putting that out there.
Yeah.
So the latest thing is called Sidekick 1.5, and that's actually oddly the third version, I think, of Sidekick.
Yeah.
I would have to count the generations of it, but I've been working on it. I think my first prototype was 2011, and I've been kind of working on it since then.
Okay. Yeah, and I remember seeing, I think it was the first one, but I remember seeing it on Tindy to start with.
Yes. The very first product name, like I didn't believe people when they said they would buy it. They wanted to buy it.
Yeah.
So I put it up on Tindy. It's actually, there's a funny story there. I guess I created my project maybe 6 months before Tindy launched. And so the way Emil solved that kind of marketplace chicken or egg problem of how do you get customers and vendors all in the same spot, he solicited people who made projects first. And then when he launched for people to come in and buy stuff, he had kind of a fully stocked e-commerce store, if you will, right? So I remember like in maybe like May of, was it 2012 maybe? He was soliciting projects. So I put mine up there. I think my official project listing is the robot that plays Angry Birds, because I hadn't implemented any other functionality yet.
Yeah,
so it was literally, that's all the robot does.
Right.
It just plays Angry Birds, nothing else. And then he emailed me 3 months later, totally forgot about it, and said, hey, there's 3 people on the waiting list. You haven't supplied like a PayPal ID. Like as soon as you do that, you will get 3 orders.
Remember?
I'm like, what? And this is also ridiculous because, again, this is at the time I was making these out of laser cut basswood, and I was flying so much back and forth between Chicago and San Francisco. I had a membership at Tech Shop San Francisco, and that's how I made all of the parts for my for the kits. So I would have to fly to San Francisco to fulfill these orders. Luckily, I went there once a month or so it all just kind of made sense. But it was a very surreal moment. I guess this is like summer or late summer of 2012 when I got 3 orders for literally the product is the robot that plays Angry Birds. And so like every moment as I'm laser cutting these kits and putting them in the mail, I was like, I can't believe this is happening.
Why do they do?
Right.
Did they want it for that? Did they figure, was there any tie to the actual testing piece at that point? Or was it just...
Right. So a bunch of people in various places, I like to call them, the people who work in the secret robot labs of the world. And they're everywhere, by the way. Everything that is made above a certain dollar amount, I guess, they have a secret robot lab, and it's full of robots.
Yep.
And they're just clicking buttons. And so there was one company, they bought 3. This was my first repeat order. They bought like 2 or 3 of them, and I'm like, okay, I definitely have to find out. They're either really into Angry Birds, they're the people who make it, right, or what's going on.
You're like, get a life, folks, come on.
Right, and they're a company. They sit between the phone makers and the telecom networks, and they certify devices on networks, and they certify networks for phones or something like that. They're kind of like service level agreements.
I actually deal with that now. Yeah,
they're like a service level agreement enforcer, if you will. Like if they've got whatever. I guess anyway. And so when I was talking to them, I was like, wow, I didn't even know that thing existed. Anyway, so I had I had a cool conversation with their founder, and we both got to, that dream of sorts of the future of robotic testing is, I guess this is slightly dystopian, but it's kind of like, that scene in The Matrix where Neo wakes up and it's just pods everywhere. Yeah. It's like that would be the dream, but like instead of humans and pods, it's like just robots and, phones tapping on screens.
Right.
Anyway.
So like if it was like like that scene in Silicon Valley too, where they actually have people in like Bangladesh clicking on stuff, but now you could just do it with robots. You're saying?
I haven't. I think I've watched up to. I definitely watched the first 2 seasons. I'm not sure if that's in season 3 or the last one.
Right,
anyway,
right. They're buying users. That's the idea. So.
So every article that's written about like jobs and automation and robots and the future being horrible, I do read that and try to there's a certain level of like I'm trying to figure out like how do I do a whole bunch of robots and automation stuff and do it ethically and not be the downfall of human society as we know it.
Okay, right, yeah, that's good. That's a good goal to shoot for. Yeah.
So with that said, I have been in that conversation with a particular customer, and they were like, if it's $1 more than this amount, it's cheaper for me to just hire hundreds of people in the Philippines, I think it was. And so it was really weird sitting there in this couch at the, I think Automate Chicago was the event that we were just sitting on a couch talking about robots versus humans, and hanging in the balance were a whole bunch of jobs in the Philippines that I didn't even know them until that sentence until he mentioned it. But
Right.
it was kind of weird. It's like, okay, so what do you do about those people who
So
now
did you
don't...
raise the price by $1 or no?
Well, it gets more complicated because they were I didn't have to worry about it because that particular order didn't happen. I think they were bidding on some other contract with one of the big 3 car makers, and
right. I think at that point,
whatever.
like those kind of like that level of ethics where it's like someone else is really making that decision. It's like, look, keep that economical, I think, and then.
I mean, what I would like to say is, I mean, my most optimistic view of this is that if that job is staring at a phone 12 hours a day, tapping the big green button, and it could easily be automated with my little, shoebox-sized robot, I would love for that person to then, move on to learning how to program JavaScript and Python, and then they can
Take your job.
Program my robots, right?
Yeah,
or
right.
They can kind of move up the tech stack and not have to click buttons. And also the other thing is, like, at least with some of those things, we had a different conversation with a different car company, and they had a particular test scenario where they wanted it to run 12 hours, like overnight. They wanted to maybe trigger like a buffer overflow or something like that. They were just going to like go backwards and forwards on one of like the screens or something like that, like go into some panel and then come back out, and they're going to see if like maybe just walking around the app for 12 hours straight, if that would trigger some kind of thing. And that's something that actually you couldn't have a human do because, if nothing else,
right.
it's illegal. It would be illegal and immoral to have a person clicking for 12 hours straight without taking a break, right? So there's certain things where it actually is more ethical and moral to have a machine do it than to have some particular test case scenario, have someone do it anyway. Yeah, but it's interesting how this all played out. I think when I was a kid, I think there was an existential crisis. I think about the robots coming in. At the time, it was Japan was coming in with all their robots, and they're going to destroy all the automobile manufacturing jobs.
Yep.
And it's weird because that kind of happened. It's kind of true. Like I haven't been inside an assembly line, but like most car doors are probably welded.
I was gonna say I've been in a Tesla assembly line, and there's some robots.
Yeah. I mean, so it's like I'm sure there are some people welding a couple things here and there, but maybe.
Right, but quality
anyway.
goes up, and I think it's a general shift to. This is going to happen no matter whether or not you make the robot or someone else makes the robot. I think that's the main thing, and that's what I've said in the show before too. It's like, look, if you want to, if you're worried about that, become the robot maker, basically.
Right. I mean, so if the robots are going to like wipe out humanity, be the maker of the robots, and make sure that you get your friends and family on the whitelist. That will say, okay, good human, right? The problem with good human versus bad human, that's like just a binary Boolean field stored in the database somewhere. So like, if you're off by
there's no slider there.
Yeah. You have to be really careful that the good human, bad human, that feature is tested.
Got it. Yep.
I'm kidding. Anyone who's listening to this, I've not implemented
anyone who clicked off at that point. Yeah.
Right.
So,
anyway.
well, let's talk about as you make these robots that are going to kill everybody. How has the process been of making these job-killing robots, Jason Huggins?
So every step of the way. I mean, I have to frame this kind of in my theory of the future. My favorite, one of my
This is why I love talking to Jason, by the way, because it never is just like, hey, how is that circuit board? The circuit board worked out fine. So no. Well, let's get deep, man.
First, let's talk about the future of humanity, and then I can tell you about this Arduino shield I'm working on.
To make an apple pie, first you must invent the universe.
Yeah. So Kevin Kelly is my favorite author. He's a
futurist. We mentioned him the other week of his 1,000 True Fans theory.
And I don't know if this is his theory or if he's just articulated it and I remembering it this way. But he's got this theory that basically over the long haul, everything is basically, everything even now, but like everything is like 51% good and 49% bad. So basically like you could spend your entire day literally almost spending, you could just consume a ton of news, and 49% of it's going to be horrible, and it's going to be really, really bad stuff, like people dying and all kinds of things, right? Mm-hmm. But the thing is, like over time, that 2% differential between 49 and 51, that means like penicillin is discovered, and polio is cured, and all of these things that actually ended up making life on Earth better. It's hard to notice that when 49% of everything at any given time is. So there is a certain level where like jobs getting displaced because of robots. Like that's kind of in the category 49%. My view on the 51% is that, and I know this will come across as kind of naive, but this is kind of where I'm at. Like I got into this stuff because like I want to make more art, and I think that like that's top of that self-actualization kind of pyramid. Like I think making a cool thing, sitting back and kind of enjoying it as a work of art, like and all the skills that went into it, I think that's like a good use of time. It's kind of a cool thing. So if there was more people who could be freed up to make cool art projects, I think that's cool. And if they could avoid, trudging along, clicking buttons on screens for 12 hours, that'd be good. Anyway, so I want to create more art in the world, and that's why, and I'm doing it in this particular way. Anyway, now I've totally forgotten. So this is like a rising tide lifts all button clickers out of the the quagmire of button clicking. So what I'm trying to do with Tapster, like it's not like this evil ploy to just like get everyone unemployed. Like really, this is.
I don't actually think that. So.
For me, this
kind of playing on that,
Right. For me, I'm trying to. I've got very particular art projects that I want to get done, and I haven't, no one's come to me and just given me a pile of money saying, I want you to make that art project. I imagine some people do have that job. You get like an art commission and there you go. I haven't stumbled into that, but what I have stumbled into it is like, I made this robot and all the people in the secret robot labs who actually have a bunch of buttons that need to get clicked. They want my robot. So, and the cool thing is that the skills that I need, with the 3D printing and CNC milling and soldering and all kinds of stuff that I need to make my art projects are the same skills I need to make these products for companies. Yep. So anyway, what I'm working on is basically kind of like this little economic engine, business model, if you will, like, to become my own art benefactor.
Yeah, I like that.
Anyway, so it's kind of like, I don't know. I haven't been to Burning Man, but there's a certain level of like, the people who just kind of work on these huge, massive art projects that really have a market of one, like, the person who thought of it and wanted it to exist. I've got things that I want to exist. I imagine someone who's listening to this who's is probably really frustrated with me right now because I mean there are so many problems in the world, and I'm not ignorant of that or immune to kind of hearing all the bad news. There's a lot of bad stuff happening all the time, but there's a certain level of like you could just wallow in that 49% of horribleness, and you can go to a really dark place, or like maybe start change your compass heading towards thinking about like, oh, maybe things will get better in the future, and art is one way to kind of it's kind of a soothing kind of a thing that
I like that. So, well, let's talk about those skills that you've built up, because you said you've built those from scratch. I guess 3D printing, not like anyone was born with that in the times that we were born in. So how did you get started with that first robot? I mean, again, you said it's you said basswood.
It started with basswood,
right? But I also remember you had this kind of modular screw down.
Yes, thing. Right. I could go. Yeah.
So maybe explain. Could you just kind of like make an audio picture of what the robot is, starting out and today?
Right.
So I remember a Delta robot. That's why I'm saying.
Right. So there's a certain level of like I know all the jargon, and I have to figure out how to like translate that back to the non-jargon word. It's a robot-y, army, clicky, articulated thing, right?
Right. It's a finger floating in 3D space.
My first robot was a Cartesian gantry style.
Okay. I didn't know that actually.
It kind of almost looked like the old school. Mendel rep wrap. It had that kind of like, if you look at it from the side,
like
kind
the
of
triangle, like the
exactly.
Pyramid
it looked like that kind of,
or an A-frame house, I suppose, right?
It looked like a generation 1 or 2 rep wrap. Basically, that's what it looked like. Someone saw that, and I moved to Deltas, and because it was playing a video game, they're like, it should be fast, and so Deltas are fast, and so saw the YouTube videos. If you haven't ever seen a YouTube video of a Delta robot packing or stacking pancakes, you should go.
I was just say, yeah, that's my former employer. ABB has one where they're sorting sausages as well. That's another one that recently came out.
Keeps coming back, right? The sausages.
Right. Or maybe it was jerky. I don't know. But either way, yes.
And then since then, I've actually moved to, and I don't know how to pronounce it, whether it's Scara or Scara, but I've moved to a parallel Scara. It kind of looks like if you put your hand to your arm, your two hands in front of you, and you're imagine like you're stirring a big, vat of spaghetti or something like that. It kind of looks like that. I think they were kind of internet famous of sorts, something called the plot clock. If you've seen it, it's a similar kind of design.
I haven't seen it.
Whatever. But to your question, the material that I used to make it, oddly, but maybe not oddly at this point, the Tapster and the robot, like that was really a spinoff from this art project that I'm pursuing since 2000. There's like a 5-hour version of this, and like I'll try and make the pithy version of it. But the particular art project I'm trying to get done is basically motorized pin art, or people don't know the name of it usually. It's pin art or pin screen. It's like that array of metal pins you can kind of put your face in.
Yeah, you always got that at like the science museum, and you put your hand in there, and then
right. So the idea that I had all these years ago was like, what if you could motorize every single one of those pins, and then it would be like a real 3D display. And so at the time, I thought that was interesting. I was doing 3D simulation on my 2D computer screen, and I had that little pin art display, and I was like, it'd be so cool if I could get the 3D simulation that's on my screen on this little pin screen, and it'd be awesome. So,
have you seen that Coca-Cola billboard that does that?
Yeah, I mean, it's come up a bunch of times. I've talked about it. So I've been so annoying about this talking with my friends. Occasionally when things pop up like this, my friends will send a link to me. I think the most frustrating in that moment when someone's like, oh yeah, it's like that thing. While I was in DC working on healthcare.gov, the MIT Inform project launched. And it's basically that exact project.
Yeah, it's like linear actuators that move the ball around. And all
so here I am.
That, like
what?
Michio, what's his name? I forgot who did it. Yeah.
I forgot the name of the principals on the project, but but it's these motorized, it's the idea.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's been this project that I'm pursuing for a long time. I think the key thing is like every single one of those pins, because I need to have so many of them, like tens of thousands of them to make it like a super epic thing. I need to drive the cost down of every pin. And actually, I'm using the wrong word, I guess. Like the formal jargony technical word would be linear actuator.
Yeah.
I need thousands and thousands of linear actuators, and I could go buy some off the shelf. That's I think what the MIT
but those
people
are all
did.
like industrial and super pricey, right? They did it with money. They fixed it with money.
So well, the MIT solved for glitz and panache. They didn't solve for cost, and so
right. As Nadia Peak says, MIT is really good at making a paper and then stopping. Right.
I mean, so I've got like a massive crush, jealousy, love-hate relationship with the MIT Media Lab. Like I love everything that they come up with, and then other times it's like, oh darn, I wish I had their PR department.
Right, exactly. They are great at that. Yeah, but
anyway,
but they're not making lots of robots to send to people either. So
right. So the key thing for this art project is I have to drive down the cost, which means like as much as I can make myself. Then I don't have to buy a bunch of parts, whatever. Then I can drive down the cost, and my goal is like $1 or $2 per linear actuator, and then at that point it's like in the ballpark of I could do this. Anyways, so the thing I've learned out of making I think robots and anything mechanical, electronic. I mean, it's kind of like a triathlon of sorts, right? You've got the software, the electronics, and the mechanical. And so I had the software background, and I did some mock-ups. And I'm not so great at web design, so there is a software demo for this, but there's literally nothing on the site that tells you any context about it. So pinthing.com. I can never figure out what to call my project, so I kept calling it pinthing. So it's pinthing.com. There's nothing about it. There's no even like secret message in like the view source. It's like literally that's it. But I had the software demo, web demo for a while. Thanks to the maker movement and open hardware, open electronics, and Arduino and Adafruit and SparkFun and all of the chocolatey goodness of the last 10 years of the electronic space, that was easier to get done. So I had the software side, the electronic side was getting easier, like all these tutorials on how to drive a simple motor from an Arduino. All that stuff was easy. But what was the huge stumbling block was the mechanical side of things. At least a couple of years ago. and I finally got to a place where I was actually prototyping with Lego Technic pieces. I don't really, whatever. Anyway, so I got to a point though where the particular
well, we should explain what that is though. The Lego Technic is the fixed hole spacing. It's like the yellow. I always think the yellow and the gray ones, right? Is that right, or is it different colors?
It's different. Anyway, Lego Mindstorms also uses Lego Technic pieces.
Yeah.
And I've never gone to like a Lego convention or anything like that, but I do. There are people who are super into Lego. I've used it as like a prototyping tool for whatever contraption I'm trying to make. Anyway, no offense to people who go to Lego conventions, but there's a certain like I'm using it in a particular way. When I realized again from this particular point where I need to make 10,000 of these things, I actually priced out like how much does Lego cost per kilogram or whatever, and it's really expensive, right?
Yeah.
And it's and then I thought it was interesting, like it's made out of ABS plastic, and all these consumer 3D printers are coming out, and they're also used ABS. So I started pricing out before I even got a 3D printer. Could I make these materials? And I think it came out to like just with filament, it's like 10x, 7x cheaper than Lego per pound or something like that. And if I move someday to like making my own filament out of like pellets or something like that, it's like another 10x improvement in the cost, whatever.
Or if you move to injection molding, which we'll also talk about.
Right. But the key thing is I had this design finally for one of these linear actuators made in Lego Technic. And that, I was like, okay, I'll be a proper engineer now and re-engineer it in some other material. Anyway, I kind of noticed but the geometry is working in Lego. So, I ported basically Lego. I designed my own Lego pieces in like an OpenSCAD.
But in a totally non-trademark infringing way, if the Danes are listening.
No, well, all of the designs for the
I'm trying to save your ass here, Jason. You should really...
So I checked on this. So all the patents for the parts they've expired, and then there's utility patents and design patents. The design patents have expired for the parts that I'm checking out. However, that hasn't stopped Lego from suing people, even when their patents have been.
They're really good at that part.
They're really good at the suing thing. But anyway, it is interesting. So I basically made my own Lego, and I can 3D print them, and it's all awesome. And so whenever I'm starting a new project, I kind of it's almost like like there's nothing more terrifying than a blank white sheet of paper, right? Like it's completely blank. It's the same thing with like
no constraints, right?
With anything with mechanical, it's hard to know kind of where to start. And so when I'm first trying to kind of sketch out an idea, I have all these beams and they're the same kind of dimensions as Lego Technic. So they're 8 millimeters wide and the holes are 8 millimeters center to center. And so I can kind of quickly kind of create some kind of boxy form. And then over time I can, be more intentional about it, get rid of the holes I don't need, whatever. But there's a certain level of my design process is like I need a box or a bucket of parts on my desk, and I just start building. And then after the fact, I'll design it from scratch.
Right. And this is a brilliant piece of prototyping advice, I think, in general, is use what you know, right? So that's obviously what you're doing. You're using standard parts, readily accessible. You could pay for them, but you're doing it for cost savings to just print them. And yeah, I think that from a prototyping perspective, that's fantastic. And
go ahead.
And I'm saying that's served you all the way up through your current iterations, right? I mean,
yes.
So your first one sounds like it was more of a rep-rappy style, but then the Delta robot that people can see online, it's very, it's got all these pieces in it, and it's got some other custom pieces too, but all the hold downs for the phone and stuff like that are adjustable.
Right. I think one of the first thoughts around that was like I had to design parts that Lego would never make, like to hold like a classic high tech 311 servo. Lego doesn't make a part for that, or an Arduino mounting plate, right? So all those things I made like a Lego compatible thing of that. But anyway, slight segue here. This is why I'm such a huge fan of the Fritzing project.
Oh no, we're going
because
there.
If you start where you are, the very first robot that I sold, besides being, again, this is the Angry Birds version. Besides being made out of wood, the circuit board was literally an Arduino and then a shield and then one of those little mini breadboards and like 6 wires to connect up. Anyway, so yes, you can start a robotics company with robots made out of wood. You can also sell circuit boards where all you're doing is giving them a breadboard and wires. Now, granted, I've moved on. I'm way more professional now. But where I started was like breadboarding and wires.
It goes back to why Jason and I enjoy talking to each other and or arguing over fritzing versus KiCad. So I actually the what did I call it? Shine on You Crazy KiCad was my even simpler version of a getting started tutorial, basically just a blinking light on top of a Raspberry Pi. That was fully inspired by Jason. And then a couple months later, it's out there. I'm like, hey, have you watched it yet? He's like, oh yeah, I'm not going to watch that. It's still too long. I'm like, it's a 20-minute video to get to a completely done circuit board. And yet for some reason,
it's
you versus Brian Benshoff until the end of time. You still stand by your fritzing.
I will tell you why. It's because the fritzing folks put together a video. This is like how to make an Arduino shield in like 1 minute, or the 1 minute Arduino shield, which I think is false advertising, because I think actually the video is like 2 minutes long. It's pretty obvious to kind of fact check them on that. However, I think that was basically where my attention span was at. It's like I like they got rid of everything else, and that was it.
Right. Well, it also points to the fact that you are not really doing all that much electronics, right? I mean, you're using a lot of the off-the-shelf stuff. You're using Arduino.
So
things
the
like that, right?
I did make my first right. Yes. So right. The robots are off-the-shelf components. Although now I have I think the design. What do you want to call it? I've got the things that I want in the next version. I might have to make a custom circuit board of that. I'm using like a.
All right, we'll finally get him. We'll get him. I'm going to get him, folks. Don't worry. But
so the gory details right now is I moved from servos to steppers, and by going into that move, the big risk with the project was it was all mechanical and electronic changes. I stuck with off the shelf like CNC circuit board, so it's like the CNC shield and then Pololu stepper drivers on top of it. One thing I noticed is that I need to disable each motor individually, so I can do a separate calibration routine. And there's only one global on or off, enable, disable. And so now I'll have to go in and figure out how to do that, or potentially make a modification to that board. And that'll probably be my first custom board. Nice. Also, I need 6 steppers for it's kind of an involved robot. And so I haven't seen any boards yet that's kind of rep family of sorts. That controls 6. Anyway, but I have done a circuit board design.
Yeah, I know. And I think what that really points to, and probably what I should have brought up at the top of the show, is that robotics is, and I think you mentioned this too, it's this holistic kind of design thing. It's like you said, mechanical, software is a huge piece. Obviously, you're doing from the browser visualization all the way down through the actual control of steppers, utilizing some libraries, stuff like that. But that's really the piece that keeps coming back to it. I mean, I don't know if you saw that. I mean, I think about the Boston Dynamics stuff, like that backflip robot they just released, but I mean, like layers upon layers upon layers of abstraction, or like robot operating system. I think you've talked about in the past. Same thing. It's just like all these abstraction layers, because we operate as domain experts, right? You were a software person who's gone down through the layers of abstraction and figured out these different pieces,
right?
But most people don't do that, especially in big companies, right? Most people aren't building bespoke robotic testing solutions.
right. I actually, ironically, I'm kind of a skeptic of the ROS, the robotic operating system, and that's not a popular opinion, I guess, is the unpopular opinion. But one specific reason is, as you pointed out, to it's like as I'm trying to understand the whole stack, I look at ROS as kind of like this huge, foggy window that I can't see through. Like they're purposely trying to create this abstraction layer that you don't have to go to the whole stack through from top to bottom and know everything. But as I'm trying to, at least for my needs, I want to be able to go I want to have a clear line of sight from the browser that's controlling things all the way to the motor that I'm
really. So you want to be able to maybe that's a good question. So can you single step a stepper from the browser, like just a jog command?
Right. I mean, it's complicated, but sending a little, WebSocket command and going all the way down to the Johnny 5 thing, and then it saying one step, right? Granted, that's probably not the most efficient thing. Like I'll find at some point I'll say, oh yeah, these abstractions are great.
I'm sure you. I mean, you already said you have, right? You're doing Johnny 5, right? You used the Johnny 5 library, so that's already an abstraction.
I think what I've realized is, and this is actually a lesson that I learned from the software world that I guess I'm kind of accidentally, just like now it's intentional because now I just thought this thought, but I used to, when I was first getting started in web development, I took an off-the-shelf massive framework, and I realized for the next year of my life, all I was doing was hacking away parts of the framework that I wasn't using. because it just was unnecessary and getting in the way and whatever. And so now I've gotten to this place where I find it's a lot easier to build things up using as few, like no framework, but like as few libraries as possible, and bring things in when I need it. And so I'm a huge fan of like very small modular things you can add to. Like in programming land, it's kind of like an argument between like using Django or Rails as like a all-in-one framework, or something small. In Python land, it would be like a Flask. It would be like this micro framework or something like that. Yeah. Anyway, jumping around.
Interesting. But, no, that's interesting too, because so I like you said at the top of the show, like I work with a lot of software people. The trend that I've seen that's really interesting is like, so I work with some software people that are building a board. They say, all right, I'm going to make a board, and I'm going to have a processor on there and maybe a couple of LEDs. Like I'm going to have 2 LEDs, and that's all it does, right? Yeah. And I start saying, well, you want to throw like, 0 ohm resistors in there so you can wire to stuff later. You want to have extra headers broken out, all this stuff. And software people push back on that very harshly. They say, no. I'm making this one thing for this one task.
Right.
And I want, and some of them say I want to understand all the way down to the bottom as well. But like but from my hardware experience, I know that I have to get as much mileage as I can out of a circuit board. Right. And I'm going to be bodging wires in there, and I'm going to be trying to tie in other things later. That's where my experience comes in, basically. Yeah. I'm not sure if it ties to this specifically, but that's a big software versus hardware thing that I've seen. Yeah,
I might be cursed to repeat this history of lessons learned. But like this board that I designed, it fritzing, and it was awesome, and it worked. But I put an AT Tiny 85 chip on there, or 84, 85, 84. 84 has the 14 pins, because I counted up how many pins I needed, and I only needed the pins that it had. And that was it.
You're like, great, done, problem solved.
And
right?
Yes, I could get the AT Mega 3 something, whatever, that has 24 pins, and it has way more features, and it would be the same cost. But it was like, I
so
wanted
many features on that, AT Mega parts,
right. But I wanted like literally like the minimal chip that I needed, and nothing extra. Of course, since then I've realized like, it would be really cool if I added I could add a rotary encoder, and like, I need an extra.
I think it's all tied to the iteration cycles, right? So for me, I know that an iteration cycle might look like a month, but it's actually 6 months, right? For hardware, right? Because it's not just getting that first board working, but it's also building up the other ones, and blah 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 blah.
Right.
You need to get as much out of it as you can. I remember a former coworker of mine, he designed in an entire extra channel that was unpopulated of a device. And people would look at it and be like, why is this board half empty? And he'd be like, you just wait. I've been here long enough. And sure enough, 6 months later, they designed a two channel version, and he looked like a goddamn hero, right?
So something related to that, I guess, like, and again, this is like showing massive like software development biases, but like I have an allergy, a severe allergy to compiled languages. So C, C++, Java, C#, anything like that requires waiting a second for it to compile.
It's so inconvenient.
So this is like my personal rule basically is like I'll only program in programming languages with a read eval print loop. Like, so that's JavaScript, Python, and I guess Ruby would be out there, right?
And that's a REPL. If people remember Tony being on the show, he talked about REPLs a lot.
Right, and so one of the things that kept me back, like held me back for years getting into electronics, was the fear of not having that instant iterative feedback loop with circuit boards. I was afraid that I was going to do something and not find out that my mistake until a week or two later. And that's
no. It starts on fire like 2 seconds later. You just got to wait 2 seconds.
So I finally just got over that fear by watching a lot of 5-minute or less YouTube videos. By the way,
at least you're consistent.
But the other part of it was like it is nice to see now that like other mill is out there. I've got an Inventables Xcarve, and you can do some milling on there. I think there's another thing I'm really excited about. Although it's not open source, so that's a dig against him, whatever. But Volterra is like a
not a fan personally. I mean, I like the people that run it, but I
haven't used it, but that's kind
of this is who they're selling to though. Like, so this is specifically this is exactly what we're talking about.
So this fits
they're
into
selling to software
that,
people because software people are like, yes, I want to close that loop, right?
Right. So hardware even if it's not something,
I'll deal with it. Software person says, I'll just iterate faster. I need to have a board, thing. I need to do this. I need to do that.
Yeah.
And then me and Dave usually say, well, if you really need it, pay for overnight shipping, right? Most people don't actually need it. It's better to just check the work and yada yada.
So actually, I did learn that, like design rules checking, like that actually I think that was like clicking that little button that just says like enforcing design rules, like that kind of got a little bit of that dopamine hit.
Fritzing? Yeah.
Yes, as in Fritzing. Okay. Where it was saying like, hey, this, all of your traces are not far enough apart from each other and whatever. It was like, oh, okay, this is kind of
naturally in KiCad. I'm just saying, I don't know. If you would have just watched a tutorial for 2 hours, you would have seen this.
Yep. Yeah. I have watched some KiCad, whatever.
KiCad, yeah. It's KiCad.
Where like that I don't know what the fritzing sound is. Anyway, where like there's that bump and move. What do they call that feature? Where you can kind of
push and shove,
push and shove, right?
Yeah.
Fritzing doesn't have that, and you're more likely than not.
Eagle doesn't have that. Come on, man.
Right. So that's a cool feature.
It's a cool feature. Yeah.
KiCad's got that on everybody. They can't take that away from you.
Right.
So anyway.
I've already, like we say often on the show, PCB packages are like religion. So I've given up proselytizing to Jason, but it's still fun to poke fun. And of course, I always have bench off on my side.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah.
Yeah.
So iteration cycles.
I don't know where to go with that. So
iteration cycles.
If people are right.
Yeah. So, but this is another interesting point. So I've asked you many times in the past, Jason, why aren't you doing injection molding yet? And it's because you are still prototyping. In fact, it sounds like because you continually update. Now,
right.
I'm not sure. Has that impacted your business versus, making a one product and then just sticking with it? Or is this necessary for the business you're in?
I think I'm luckily in a spot where it's, for all the kids in the garage working on, their latest iPhone app, they should get into robots. You're like, it's a sweet, no, it's a horrible field. Don't go into it. No, where I'm in now is
it's Bezos, stay away.
Right. It's right now, it's currently, but obviously not the future when we do, take over the world. It's low volume, high margin. And so therefore, it's important to kind of get it right. Yep. And I guess in that context, I could pay for overnight shipping, I suppose. I don't have to drive. It's not like I'm making a million things and I have to figure, and every penny counts.
It's really industrial. I think this is the industrial version of software testing, right?
Right. But there is kind of a dilemma of sorts there where like I do have a limited capacity to make a certain number of robots per month, right? Although I do have 8, I'm looking in my office here, I've got 8 3D printers and,
right. Yeah, so Jason has basically a print farm. That's the easy way to think about it.
Yeah. Ironically, my job when I was at Google and the previous company, it was the Selenium farm, where the whole thing was divide and conquer.
Stack
you have 100 virtual machines. You divide your tests across 100 machines. That gets done in a minute. Blah blah blah. Yep. So I'm applying the same divide and conquer kind of thing to hardware. Like, well, if 3D printing is slow, the solution to that is obviously get 100 3D printers. Duh. Right? Why would you with injection molding like? You have to anyway. So there is kind of a tension of sorts of like, okay, yes, we're a 2-person company. I've got 3D printers, but there is still a max on how many I could put together in a month. And so there's that dilemma when I wake up in the morning, like I could go sell more robots or I could go make more robots. Like there's a certain cap on how many I can sell just based on, my capacity. Right. So there's a tipping point, I think, where, and that's still in the future, where it makes more sense to go for that super efficient injection molding, outsourced every little part thing. But it's kind of an adventure of sorts to kind of find there.
Right. Well, it sounds like you're iterating your way there, though, too, right? So you basically have this it seems like pretty close relationship with what consumers need, right? Or your clients need.
Right.
And you keep tweaking the product to get towards that.
Right.
I assume at some point you're going to, basically you're going to run out of robots in a month and be like, oh, I have to do something here.
Right.
Not that it'll be a fun month, but I'm just saying that like you're going to hit that product fit that's going to be good enough that you're going to be like, oh, well, now I just make 1,000 of these, right?
Yeah, and so I'm still kind of discovering that, right? So like there's a classic kind of Silicon Valley ethos of like fail fast, and I'm a fan of the other side of like fail slowly, right? Like like have lots of have a lot of money,
control burn,
right. Like don't live in Silicon Valley, live in Chicago. Like have a I was in my basement for a while, then I finally got an office, but fail slowly. It means like, increase your burn rate, whatever, blah, blah, blah. so just sorry, just rambling around, but there's like one, for example, the most recent tweak to the product. I thought it was amazing, and it can go to any XYZ location and click any physical or virtual button on the phone. And the feedback from the customer who had that version was like, it's great and it can do the thing, but I want it to tap faster, right? Speed is always a feature in anything, and including robots that tap buttons, right? And so I had it was like a lead screw. It can kind of go up and down. It could still, double tap, whatever. Okay, so I want to solve this problem forever. So I changed the fancy word for where the finger is, the end effector on a robot. Yep. I swapped that out with a solenoid. Now
just the finger. The tip of the finger extends instead of.
So actually, there's now two Z-axis movements. Basically, there's the stepper that's driving a lead screw that can kind of go up and down and get to the side buttons or whatever, kind of like slow.
Oh, I see.
The slow twitch muscle.
And this is for people that are thinking about like the Z-axis is the slowest axis on a 3D printer as well. You're just not moving it as much.
So when you have to get to somewhere, I still have that axis. But when I'm hovering over the screen and now I just need to like tap as fast as possible, I have a solenoid right there with a little conductive tip there soaking that. I've clocked it now. I changed the made some software tweaks. I'm now up to 800 taps per minute. So
wow. Okay.
So that was yes. But to your point, like that was customer feedback, and because I didn't have a factory in a foreign country and a massive volume that of inventory that I had to sell down or whatever, like I could just instantly change the product, make a tweak and then send them a YouTube video.
Right. Well, this is all super niche still, right? I mean, people know they need this. The ones who know they need it, like you said, they had Secret Robot Labs, but then they had to start from scratch. Now you're basically saying, I'm in your domain at least. Let's talk about what you actually need. Because like you said, I think you said some of them are touching the buttons on the side versus the actual screen. That's a totally different action than tapping a screen or different size products or like you said, cars don't have, you can't put a robot flat on its like on the ground. You have to mount it to the actual touch screen or inside the car or whatever, right? So like all of these things are different constraints,
right? So there is a certain what do you call it, envy of sorts. Like it would be cooler if I was working on something that had the scale of like the Arduino project, because like that, who wouldn't want to be the folks on the Arduino project or whatever, like where whatever. I wish I was working on some bigger, more higher impact thing, or I don't know. It sounds all just annoying. But I mean, there's a certain level though of like I have to kind of focus on like what business. Do I want
you
out
need
of
to
this?
Have a business at a certain point, right?
I mean, at some point, like okay, fine. I've never been on the cover of Meg magazine. That might never happen. Although my robot was in Popular Science, so I do have that. But hey, I mean, so that basically that envy and
star,
that envy and jealousy will kill you, right? But like I have to keep focusing on like what I want. And the thing is like I've got all these art projects. And I kind of have to get comfortable with the fact that like I might create them and no one will know they exist, and it'll it'll get no likes on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook or whatever. But I will know. Hugs. But I will know at the end of the day I wanted to make something, and it took me 20 years, but I finally learned how to make it with electronics and software and mechanical stuff. But I set out to do a thing and then I did it, right?
Yeah.
And so that's like the thing that I really want to get to, and whether however it works, like I'm lucky that I found like I could leverage my software testing career into this hardware testing thing. And I also kind of look at it as
people pay for it. I mean, that's the main thing that enables all this, right?
That's the key thing. So I'm also kind of like looking at it from a all these lessons I learned from Silicon Valley. Like I'm basically doing the opposite, right? So instead of like go big or go home, I went home. I worked out of my I worked out of my house for a while. Or there's this thing of like it's Grand Slams or die. It's like I would rather you can win games on doubles and triples.
That's right.
So there's a certain level of like
references. Huh? Oh boy,
right.
That's a tough thing in Chicago, man.
Sorry. So there's this feeling of like instead of taking venture capital,
right. I wanted to come to this. So tell me about your venture capital world, because you were in Silicon Valley. You've seen how it goes. Your first company did take VC or no?
Took a lot.
Okay, perfect.
I think the last round I think was like $75 million or something like that.
Holy balls. Okay. So so what about Tiny Robot Company then? So what was your thing here?
So I did. Disclosure, I did take a seed, what do you want to call it, pre-seed, whatever the words are called.
A little bit of money.
Bryce Roberts at OATV started this thing called Indie.vc. And it's kind of weird paradox thing where a VC is basically saying like, screw VCs and whatever. Right. He was like the one VC.
I like Bryce, and I like this model too. It's basically cash flow is more important than big sell at the end, right? That's kind of the short pitch.
The Indie.vc program is like the anti-accelerator, right? Instead of focusing on a demo day and working on your pitch, it's all about profitability and talking to customers.
20 year timeline kind of stuff,
right? So this was the January of 2015 is when he launched this, and I was already going to incorporate Tapster. I think right around that same month, I got an order for 10 robots from a very large car company. And I'm like, wow. And at that point, this was just a hobby. And I really needed to now at this point, treat it as seriously as this car company was. Because like, if nothing else, limited liability is a thing.
Sure. Yeah.
Anyway,
not to mention that you're also now playing in the hardware world, where another difference I've learned between software and hardware world is like, hey guys, don't forget about the cash flow. You got to buy a bunch of shit. You need to have stuff to build stuff.
That's another benefit of having low volume, high margin kind of stuff. Because I don't have to. Totally. I don't have have half of my cash just sitting.
You don't
on
have any
shelf.
warehouse space because it's your office, right? Or your basement.
Right. So I was. I got so many. It's not the AMP 2 hour, sorry, but
we're cool, man. We got time. Yeah.
Bryce was basically the only VC that I kept in touch with when I was doing all the pitching all those years for Sauce Labs. And I remember one conversation. This was before he started Indie. I was like, why is it that investors are always going for grand slams and the go big or die? Like, why can't you like dividends, like why is that such a dirty word or something like that, right? Like or like cash, just why can't you just focus on
know what your earnings are?
Yeah, why can't you just focus on profits, right? Like, and if nothing else, like if you're profitable, next time you go for a fundraising round, because you're profitable, you don't have to take any horrible deal. Like you could walk away. If you're doing that huge scale thing, you're always at the risk of going out of business every 6 months, right? So. Anyway, but the weird thing
you're in good company here as well. I mean, we talk about that stuff, self-funding, all that.
Yeah.
All that
so in that conversation with him, he was agreeing with me, and I was there for like an argument, like the old school, like Monty Python. Like, no, I'm here to argue with you. Why are you agreeing with me? Like, I wanted you to articulate the VC point of view. He was like, no. Like he was frustrated as well from the VC side. I was like, that was amazing. So when he actually launched Indie.vc, when I first saw it, like, oh, this is exactly the thing that I remember talking about with Bryce. So I was at midway through writing an email saying, Bryce, did you check this out? I scrolled to the bottom. It said like Bryce Roberts, like, oh, you punk. Anyway, so I applied almost as kind of like just like a +1, thumbs up to like, this is kind of the future of
juice his stats and be like, oh, we got 201 applications instead of 200.
Right. So I ended up, but out of a couple hundred applications, they did pick Tapster. And so we're one of the 8 founding, whatever you want to call it, the first batch of sorts of the companies. Anyway, so
how does that impact you though? Like, so you said you didn't take much VC, but
so that was the only funding. So that was like $100,000 convertible note. And it's also interesting because you can actually kind of quote unquote pay it back. I'm not using financial technical terms here, but you can
buy your way out of having meetings with VCs in the future, right?
Right. So in the sense, and more importantly, the ethical, like the unwritten promise when you take any funding is like, you're going to go raise a bigger round next year, right? Like you're going to go, you're going to try to get this sold or IPO in 5 years or less, right? With this, it's like, no, focus on making a profitable company. Like, so it's much of like the implicit promise of the strings attached with that money as much as the actual money.
This is more like grandpa giving you a loan rather than
a well-connected grandpa, right? I guess.
Yeah, of course. Grandpa's loaded,
Right. I mean, so the thing I love
Grandpa's
about
loaded and he knows about business. You're still going to ask him business questions.
I guess the thing I love about OATV and Bryce and out of all the VC firms, one of the things like you can't take this away from them. They funded Chumby.
Yeah.
And Chumby
Which is Bunny's company, if people don't know. Yeah,
go Google it. Granted, it was obviously dead in the water the second the iPhone and the Android came out. It was like obviously like, oh, they're dead.
I don't know that Amazon basically made the Chumby. That's
ironically, it's Chumby's
Amazon,
coming back, but it was such this wholesome, good electronics kind of like. Actually, I think even one of the first. I can't remember if their circuit boards were open. If they were like open hardware before it was cool.
It was eventually open. I don't think it was open when they launched, but I think I think Bunny was allowed to open source them at the end.
So I'm getting my facts wrong here, but or fuzzy. But I loved them, and then therefore like
I saw one on a desk at the co-working space I'm at the other day. I was so excited too. It's like,
So
oh my goodness, there it is.
So there's a certain level of like that blends between like any kind of piece of hardware that is not just like a boring piece of industrial equipment. Like it's something that puts you a smile on your face. Like I respect people who kind of go for that extra step. I don't think the Amazon Chumby modern day remake is that smile inducing, I guess.
Got it.
I guess you get your
nor
smile.
Is goofy, right?
right. Anyway, so they fund hardware companies, if nothing else, and the kind of hardware companies that are quirky that I kind of like.
Right.
So whatever. But the nice thing is that that was 2015. There's been zero conversations or pressure or whatever to ever do any more fundraising beyond that. I think the way I look at it, my tagline for that is like it's just enough VC BS. Every quarter, they email me and ask for the financials, which means I have to have financials. Like I have an accountant,
right,
I have a bookkeeper. Like we have profit, cash flow statements, all that stuff. It's nice having kind of a, what do you call it, accountability buddy kind of a thing of like
accountability buddy, yeah,
right, like that. It makes things like seem professional because they are. So when I try to go higher, like it's like, hey, I do have an investor. They are like they are interested in making this thing go. But the nice thing is that we don't have all the stuff that you don't need, like fancy monthly board meetings in fancy expensive places with catered lunches and whatever, and all of the drama that goes with like just perfecting your pitch deck to the expense of actually making a good product, or all of this stuff, like
the other stuff. Yep.
All the other stuff. It's like, no, I obsess with the product and talking to customers, and so does Bryce, and so that's nice. Anyway, I could ramble on about a million topics.
No. This is good. So
anyway.
Ultimately, though, what did this impact of? So basically, you had to focus on cash flow, actually making a profit, like basically getting paid, right? I mean, like you were making so what is? I mean, do you have a retail price on your? You don't have a site that sells just robots anymore, right? You quote jobs now, but.
Right. Well, so I did have pricing up. I just recently took it down. Tapster.io, if you want to go check it out.
So hip.io.
.io.
Right. Also,
ironically, Philips Electronics owns Tapster.com because they had a pair of headphones that was out like 10 years ago. Obviously, it didn't do well. No one. Anyway, so they own that. I think they own Tapster.com. Someday I'll have to figure out how to get that from them.
VC
whatever.
Money.
Yeah, that's right. That's the downside. Anyway, but there is when my very first Angry Birds robot was like $100, and it actually cost more than that to make.
Oh yeah, totally.
So I was losing money every time I went to the post office. Since then, I've learned to raise my prices. Now the robot is hovering around like $5,000, which is like what? A bit ridiculous, but at the same time,
I bet they gladly pay that. At like you are solving an issue, right? You were basically replacing. Well, you're replacing a person, right? I mean, you're replacing a finger,
right?
So
there is
a finger. I can get you a finger. That should be your company slogan, right? Like Walter from Big Lebowski.
There's a bunch of puns out there. I've got kind of a text file of various versions of this. We're giving the finger to.
Right. Yeah, that's good. Yep.
There are other companies that are specifically doing quality control robotic finger testing things, and one is based in Japan, and I think their retail price is like $50,000 to $60,000. No, $50,000 just for like old 9-button Nokia phones. I think like the touchscreen version is like $75,000. There's another company, and actually they were just acquired by a company in China a couple months ago, but they're a company in Finland, I think. And their robot sells for like $100,000, and that's just before the software. Once you add the software, then it's even more.
Right.
And so there's also a certain level of like I'm coming in, classic kind of disruptive, whatever. Maybe this is the part of the VC or the Silicon Valley.
It's showing. Yeah,
shtick.
Your slip is showing, man. Yeah.
Right. So come in
anyways.
10x. It can be 10x better or 10x cheaper. So I guess I went with the cheaper part. Hopefully it'll be better because it is a very high quality testing robot. Other kind of footnote to history. The thing I like to point out is that a lot of people look at HP and specifically, the whole idea of a garage startup. It started with HP in Palo Alto. Their first product,
the 200A. 200
was a piece of testing equipment. So there's a certain level of like, I'm more hipster Silicon Valley than anybody in Silicon Valley.
you're not going to find listeners of this show who don't think HP and think test equipment. Yeah, maybe calculators as well, but I mean, Amp Hour listeners know that HP is truly a test equipment company, and then it got bastardized and started making computers and whatever the hell they are these days.
If you want to start a company, testing is not a bad way to do it.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good point. So the pricing that you do though, do you actually do the kind of application engineering as well? How much do you work with a customer to actually get a robot implemented in their system?
Right. So this is kind of a repeat of sorts with my previous project. Like just running the infrastructure is such a big enough of a job that I don't write the tests for them. I will get to them to the point where they know how to do it. Maybe I'll give them kind of a hello world test. But I won't do that for them. But it depends, right? If we put together a package, then maybe I'll write a couple of tests for them.
Right. Because this is interesting too, because we've talked on the show before about like productizing services and making services out of products and all that stuff, right? So like the classic thing is for products, if you want to make it a service and you add like a SaaS component, or if you're a consultant, you want to make it whatever, you make it into a product, right? And so that's like what Dave does with testing gear, stuff like that. So this is kind of in that weird middle ground though, right? So especially if you keep changing the robot, I assume there's probably there's documentation, but it's not like, full product documentation. I assume.
Right. I mean, so
who are you interfacing with as well? I guess that's the question that I'm really getting at.
This gets kind of really wonky, I guess. But I'm taking a lot of lessons learned from the previous experience doing test automation. I'm kind of seeing some patterns, either whether I'm seeking them out or I'm kind of falling into it because I can kind of pick up on them. But what I have noticed is that there's like a typical kind of archetype for a person who's on a project. And usually it's not the end line engineer writing the test. It's their boss. And, a good manager, I don't know if you've heard the umbrella theory of management. A good manager can kind of basically hold an umbrella over their workers and kind of keep all of the gunk of the world from falling on top of the engineer.
I've had that boss, but I've never heard that.
You can hear it. You can use a different 4-letter word than gunk, but a certain level of like it's the gunk umbrella, right?
Yeah, sure.
You either let it flow onto your engineers, flow right down onto them, or kind of protect them. The best engineers, and these are the best managers, but they're manager engineers of sorts, that they can hear their engineers coming up with like mentioning they have these quote unquote untestable or impossible to test scenarios. Like they're either test engineers or they're working on the product and they're pointing out, they're like, hey, there's a couple of scenarios, and like one specifically, like, oh, when our little device disconnects, Bluetooth, and then it loses connection to iPhone, we don't have an automated test for that, and we don't have any automated test rig for that.
Right.
And so I think we need a robot because there's no other way to do it. And so
you need a robot or a really smart dog.
And so either that engineer will go and do a day of Googling and find me, and then task their manager, like, hey, go talk to that guy and see if he's like legit, or the manager will go on the quest to, themselves and go start finding out if it's possible. And then when they start searching, like testing, robot, button clicking, whatever, they find me. And so I kind of, it usually gets down to like, let's say out of like 100 test cases for whatever random thing you're building. I think the most interesting ones, at least lately, are like they have a Bluetooth device and an iPhone app, and they're trying to, how do those two things talk to each other and automate, when Wi-Fi drops or Bluetooth, whatever. Those test cases where they need a robot are interesting, right? And so we'll kind of like explore that space, if you will, from in a conversation, and then say like, actually, well, you could totally just use the iPhone simulator for that. No, but this other one, you totally need a robot. Let's talk about that, right? And then sometimes they'll say like, oh, but like we're testing on an iPad or something. I'm like, okay, well, I'll make a bigger version of the robot for that, or whatever. Or multi-touch or whatever. Anyway, so it becomes kind of like you kind of explore kind of like what they actually need, and kind of go down there. But then I deliver the thing, and then there's probably some, actually I guess my customer, they're more likely software engineers.
Okay, so that's like an API access kind of thing, or what does that look
like? So the dream coming from the Selenium project, or if people are familiar with that, it has this protocol, the WebDriver protocol. Like the dream actually is to if the dream for the Selenium project was you could write one test and it could automate any web browser, the idea would be for my robot to kind of be sitting there and it would speak the WebDriver protocol. Oh, so really you're talking to it over like a JSON plus HTTP interface. and then at that point, it then tells the robot to go to a location. So I guess maybe WebDriver is my robot operating system, as far as like my level of abstraction.
But it's still pretty low level of like go to position, 42, comma.
Right. Well,
kind of thing,
well, it depends on what level of abstraction, right? So at a very basic level, it's like playing a game of Battleship, right? Like you go to XYZ, whatever. But
that's what they want, though. That's what I'm really asking.
That's the minimum they need to get going. One level above that is computer vision integration, which gets kind of awesome pretty quickly, or at least kind of fun to hack on. Where I use the OpenCV library, I'm using either a video feed off the device or a camera, and then I'm using open computer vision magic to find elements on the screen, converting that to an element, and then clicking that.
Oh wow! Okay,
super fun stuff.
Yeah, that's super cool.
And that's doing it all in JavaScript.
Alicia's kind of working on that too for so from Embedded FM. She's doing that she's doing computer vision for typing on keyboards, I think.
Oh,
yeah, cool. Yeah, so I might put you guys together at some point. Yeah. Okay, that's cool. So that is the interface. Is basically So I've talked to Mike Osman about this too. I said to him at DEF CON, I said he's basically making software interfaces for the RF spectrum, right? That's what he's basically making. You're basically making software interfaces for a finger.
So the way I describe it, it's like the reverse Tron. I'm taking
Tron. I like that.
The way I would describe actually Selenium all those years ago was like it's like a virtual robot that sits inside your computer screen and types text into fields or clicks buttons on a web browser. And so I think that's how I got into robotics. Partly was because like I wanted to test this metaphor and like make a quote unquote real world Selenium robot that can type text on real keyboards and click real buttons and things like that. So there's a certain feeling of there's automation in the software space is kind of like a known thing. To like anything you see on your computer screen, you can write some automation script for that. Whatever. Ironically, actually, kind of little things that I noticed that no one ever notices. If you have an OS 10 machine, there's a program called Automator, and it's kind of like a macro script writing tool. The logo for making an Automator script is a little robotic, hand finger thing. So that's kind of funny. There's this other someone somewhere at Apple also saw this relationship between like virtual robots on your OS on your computer screen and real robots clicking buttons, whatever. But it's the way I look at it is like I'm taking all these lessons learned from software automation and applying that to the real world. And if you boil it down, like WebDriver is a very complicated project, but ultimately there's two classes of API methods. There's like finding things and then doing things to the thing you found. and if you think about robotics, that's
how I live my life, man. I'm like hungry and I go find a sandwich and then I do a thing to that sandwich, which is eat it.
I guess that's three things, right? That gets very philosophical. Okay, I want a sandwich. Okay, now I have to go find the sandwich and then
someone needs a want robot. That's the
and then you put that sandwich somewhere, right? So I haven't figured out, I can't make more people want more robots. But once you have a robot, or the classic thing of like, the beer in the fridge, right? So you have to navigate to the fridge and navigate back and then also find the beer in the fridge, whatever. The thing I've noticed that like we'll probably never actually have like it'll be very impractical to have beer fetching robots that look like humans because like the most efficient, cheaper version that you're going to go buy at Best Buy or Home Depot someday is you're going to have something that looks more like the beginning scenes of like Back to the Future, where it's like a vending machine. Like it just there's no robot. It's just a lot of mechanical
like
industrial.
A can launcher almost, right? Yeah.
Yeah, or a drone will just fly over your desk and just drop it or something like that. It's not going to be an articulated arm.
Right, or it's just a fridge with wheels.
Or well, actually, it might be the Boston Dynamics. Their latest version.
I was gonna say that's not a practical robot for just about anything. The best application I've seen is the DARPA stuff where they go and try and like rescue like dangerous situations, right? That they're doing as a test, but the robot is truly doing a human replacement thing.
So side notes to side notes. The one thing I found fascinating about basically there's like 4 countries. If you're gonna plop down on the world anywhere. You want to find your way to one of, Japan, Germany, US, or China if you want to do robotics. And the interesting thing culturally in Japan for years, which has now changed because of the Fukushima nuclear accident, Japanese robotics mostly focused on like protocol and like humanoid robots, like, the more often YouTube video you'd find of a Japanese robot would be something that could like
Asimo,
like it could like dance or walk or wave hello
or fall over.
The kind of culturally embarrassing thing after Fukushima was that none of those robots could go into a nuclear reactor and find the missing uranium rods, right? Like they were all like.
I don't know, but could any robot do that in any country?
No.
I mean, like the Atlas robot, which is the one we're talking about with the DARPA stuff, right? Like, that's the idea, but none of them could actually do that.
Culturally, though, I think American companies were more focusing on those kind of industrial purposes. I think I have to go find. I have to find my. So there's a kind of a cultural difference of like. Practical robots versus kind of entertainment robots, and I think now that those cultural differences are changing. I think like specifically because of Fukushima, there's now more Japanese companies, robotics companies specifically focusing on those industrial, get in and like open a door.
Right. Well, maybe there's money for it, right? Like the same thing of testing.
Right.
Now that thing has happened, that has driven a new class of need. Right.
But on the other end, you have also, American companies doing more entertainment robots, right? You've got Sphero and a bunch of other.
What's an entertainment robot? I guess I didn't understand that.
Yeah. So. Well, I guess it's something that just doesn't solve a problem, other than maybe putting a smile on your face.
Right.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There are other countries. We should say before you write in, we know there's other countries that are doing robotics. Please don't say we don't care. Yeah.
I'm. How do I say this? I can get in trouble here. I sometimes I take an argument, I push it to an extreme, and then obviously once you get into the gunk of any particular point or argument, it depends. There's never a black and white line.
Yeah.
What I did notice though, at least within like there's usual suspects for robotics companies. For a long time it was mostly Germany, US, Japan, China is coming up there, but I've shipped my robots in lots of different places. And the other thing is, I'm a huge fan of open source. Like that's a really key part of what I'm doing now, open source software and open hardware. And one of the key reasons, so yeah, for a person who's not living in Japan, Germany, China, or the US, part of the reason why I wanted to keep my designs as 3D printable as possible is so people could download the plans and make it locally. I totally drank all the Kool-Aid when people were talking about the nirvana of 3D printing and the next wave of industrial revolution, all this stuff. Like I thought it would be amazing. And I have seen the frustration of making something in one country and shipping it to another place. Like I shipped a couple of robots to Brazil, and getting anything through customs in Brazil is incredibly difficult, is to be charitable. And so it would be easier if someone was there with a 3D printer. They could just download the plans from GitHub and just make it locally. So there's a certain feeling of like, I do not want to think that only robots can come from 4 countries. Like I would love it if they could be made everywhere. And open source is kind of like a cool kind of infection vector for that.
I think I was watching Limor and Phil talk on their weekly show. I think they were talking about Arduino opened a factory down there just for that purpose. There's like Brazil only Arduinos now because of the tariffs and the hassle to get down there. So,
yeah, I'd heard about it, and then I actually experienced it firsthand. And
You're like, I'll just open a factory. That's way easier.
Right.
Well, so what is the next stage of? I mean, like you said, I mean, the growth isn't like the main focus, but obviously you want to keep, putting more automation, more testing into the world. So what is the next stage? When do you ever pull that trigger on injection molding or anything like that?
I don't know. I think my biggest focus is I've got those art projects that I keep saying the company is funding those things, but like some of those things they haven't gotten farther along. So I'm trying to figure out anyway, so I'm mostly obsessed with the art side of the business. The business side, I think the bigger problem I think is I need to get to a position where I can hire, and I specifically want to hire a software engineer. Ironically, I think you could go down this whole rabbit hole here, but do I try to find someone who is a mechatronics person who can do everything, do the mechanical, electronics, and the software? That would be the perfect person. But absent that, it would be someone who can work on more of the software engineering sides of things. And so
when you say mechatronics, you also mean someone that software is also in that stack, you're saying, right?
Right. Yeah. I'm realizing that I think I have, it's always kind of like a 3-legged stool of software, electronics, and mechanical stuff. But I'm realizing I need someone who's really strong on the software for some of the stuff that I want to do. Like I haven't done I want to get more progress made on the computer vision OpenCV stuff, right? Whatever. I haven't had to. How do I say this? Like, this is maybe a little too much in the weeds here, but I've improved the business model, if you will, in some of these categories. With talking with customers, it's not as you were kind of touching on it. It's not just the hardware; it's the helping with the writing of the tests.
Yep.
So there's a certain level of like
on top of it or whatever, right? You're selling a package.
It's like a support plan, kind of like the Red Hat model, where
that's right. Yep.
It's like a quarterly payment, and like it's almost like you're paying for everything, not just the physical good, but like
eventually you would have a training manager, you would have a software consultant that could fly in if they needed that. Right.
So I'm putting together these packages where it's like, I'll do an on-site quarterly visit, I'll do a training workshop.
All these things are just you right now, right?
Right. But there's a certain level of like that pay. Like when you start talking in terms of fractions of a person's salary, you quickly get into tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so at that point, you can kind of kick the can again on not having to scale up to do thousands of robots, because right now it's ironically robotics company, but like labor intensive, right? Because it's like you have this robot that can click buttons on a phone, but you still need a skilled engineer to figure out how to consume that API and like make an automated test for it and whatever, and plug it into their when code gets checked in on GitHub and that whole build pipeline, and that this kind of fits in at the end of that. Like it's still a programming heavy job. So I'm kind of like as I think like the current snapshot of the company is focused on like kind of that, like that engineering services, if you will.
It almost sounds like machine building too. So my when I used to be on the Engineering Commons, Jeff, my co-host, who's still doing it, he was a machine builder, right? So he would go into factories and they'd be like, well, we need to, put this sausage into this wrapping, right? Like that kind of thing. And it basically would make that thing happen. Right. Or if people have watched Jeff Kaiser, the stuff that like that the Valve hardware thing, like they have that was the facility out here where they're actually doing all these different test things on the Steam controller.
Right. This is actually touches on something that I'm still puzzled with. It's like I haven't quite found my place in the world. With that, not too philosophical, like more like product focused. Like if I go to a software conference and I show off my robot, I'm a little bit of a circus, sideshow. And granted, almost intentionally so. Like the first one, it was like specifically like, hey, can I play a video game? Angry right. Yeah. And so now, but there's this thing where like I've realized that most iPhone or Android developers, they don't need the robot. Like they can do is a lot in a simulator. It's the people making these devices when they sit between the hardware and software world. They have an iPhone thing and a Bluetooth device. And the weird thing is about those people, or even let's say the car companies or device manufacturers, like I guess I could go to a device manufacturer conference or a car company conference, but the other weird thing at the other end of the scale is like the robotics conferences. The people who are finding me and needing the robotic finger are not necessarily going to an industrial robotics conference. Specifically for that point, most robots are deployed on like an assembly line in kind of a very
super specific
physical goods moving kind of industry. And like I would love to go and be a full-fledged, card carrying member of the robotics world and go to the robotics conferences. But most of that, is physical goods stuff. So if I'm now actually making a robot that's plugged into kind of a software development pipeline, the software people who are getting my stuff are not going to robotics conferences. And anyway, it's just like this weird thing where
no. That I think points to a great need though too, right? I mean that's the idea, is that there aren't other people in this space, right? So people were going to those robotics conferences and they got sold big equipment and they went into their secret robot labs, and then
that's actually one of my customers. They were like, they bought the $100,000 pick and place machine and was like duct taping a little iPad stylus to the end, and they were so glad they didn't have to pay $100,000. Granted, I realized like one, there's a market for my stuff, and two, I should raise my prices.
Right, but then also the scaling thing is the same thing, right? So this is the same thing you talked about with 3D printers. If they want to go from one tester to 10 testers, that's literally impossible for them. With you, with a smaller thing, then that's totally possible.
That's a direct repeat of the lessons I learned with software. Granted, like there's this idea where it's like you can make things more efficient, or you can just
Jason,
throw more hard.
I was gonna say you're like a 3-trick pony here. It's great. It's not a 1-trick pony, like a 3-trick pony, but it works. You know, like I mean, like this is great. This is exactly right.
I'm a fan of the worse is better philosophy. So it's like, yes, you can make an efficient algorithm, or you can just like buy more computers and just split the job over more computers and just like brute force the thing.
Computers are cheap.
Right. So now that
People
robots
are
are
expensive.
now that robots are cheap, you'll find robots doing more things.
Yeah, right. No, I think super tangent here, but like I look at like the ESP 8266 as like an enabling thing. Literally, I mean, yes, it's capable, right? But like it's all cost, right? I mean, like just when you start having costs drop like that, you just never know what's going to happen. So if you have to pick among those 10 times better, 10 times cheaper, I'd probably say cheaper if you can, like
right. I mean, because the thing is, like, everyone is embarrassed when the thing sucks, right? So like you will always be pressured to make the thing better. Yep. And you will go there because you want it to be better. You want to sell more and whatever, but it helps.
Well, I think from a community perspective though too, right? So that if you have something that 100,000 people can afford versus 1,000 people, then you start playing those numbers of like, well, if 100 people have it, then 10 are going to try and do anything with it. One person's actually going to contribute to an open source project, right? And then that just builds the software base from that. Right. Same thing happened with Raspberry Pi. Same thing happened with ESPs. All that stuff.
Right. I think there's one other aspect of this, like the scale between, cheap or better. I have to be careful, like, wow, he makes really crappy robots, right? There's a certain level of like, you can kind of, you can put very quantifiable kind of bookends on your risk on what is, considered cheap and not good. Like, I used a certain kind of motor, and one particular customer said, what's the mean time between failure on that thing, right? And I'm like, I don't know. And like, well, have you run an environmental test, like put it in a humidity chamber, and I'm like, I probably should do that, but I don't know. Like, how about this?
How about this? You tell me what an environmental chamber is, and I will find one.
I mean, actually, I on my to-do list is to go buy one of those like wine cellar refrigerators.
Oh, come on, man! They have them at M-Hub. You can just come over there.
Okay, wait. My point is, what I told them is like, okay, look, I don't know, but let's see. I'm going to add an infinite warranty on that part. If it dies, I'll replace it immediately and for free, and I'll even drive to you and replace it, right? So there's a certain point where that totally does not scale. That does not work when you're selling 1 million a month. But it does work when you're a small company, a little startup, and you've got a couple of customers, and you don't know how good or bad these parts are. You can kind of just say like, hey, look, it's this price, and if any part on that breaks, I will replace it for free. And then of course you get that feedback, and hopefully that next version you don't have to do it. Like in the sense of like, I'm willing to learn that lesson of like, oh, I should have picked a better part. I'll willing to learn that lesson.
With dollars,
right? Like one lesson is like, if someone in Brazil wants to buy one of my robots, I will find another way to get it to them, other than the previous way. Don't ever use the postal service to Brazil.
I was going to say, you go down, you suddenly start taking trips down for Carnival.
Well, you get a DHL account, and you become best friends with your account manager. You do not. Anyway. So there's ways that you can mitigate the risks of being that quote unquote 10x cheaper. Also, I think the other thing I've lucked out with is like going into robots. I'm starting out with something the size of a shoebox. Like if I had to have something that was the size of an SUV,
an Atlas robot.
Yeah, I mean I would have to bring in all this other stuff of like how would I get it there? I have to come have to think about freight.
Start making crates and
then the safety cages, and like my robots right now at least are incapable of killing people. I haven't tested this, but it's all like 5 volts Arduino stuff, and maybe I don't want to know this, but like I don't know if an Arduino's killed anybody yet. I hope not. I'm not the first. But 5-volt electronics seems to be kind of safe. So starting in kind of a safe spot. So even if it breaks,
I mean, we all know that your robot's going to be dangerous if it starts wielding a knife as an end effector, right? That's the real.
I do have this theory of like the end goal for testing. You have 2 extreme scenarios. One, it's not just a robotic finger the size of a shoebox. It's something that really to make a robot that can test anything the way a human would, you really actually need a Terminator. I mean, it walks and it can make a cup of coffee or open a door just like any human, right? To the point where
you started in 2000. You have a Tapster. So when you eventually name your robot the T1000,
right? Yeah, it's even funny. T could have been for Tapster, right? Who knows? But I like to say that I'm probably not the inventor of Skynet because no one's come back from the future and to try to take me out.
Right. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So anyway,
you only get one shot,
Right.
So where are we here?
Well, you got Terminator robots. Really, they were invented for testing. If you go and Google, probably the backstory on Teradyne or whatever it was probably or what was it, Scott? What was the company that made
it might have been Teradyne. I don't remember. Yeah.
Anyway, I think that's actually a real company. Cyberdyne Teradyne is actually, ironically, a testing company that acquired Universal Robots. They are an actual company. So I think it was Cyberdyne Systems.
Okay.
Right. So if we change the name of Tapster to Cyberdyne, then you should raise an eyebrow.
Got it. Okay.
Anyway.
Well, I guess we end on Terminator, right? We use the Terminator.
The other end of the spectrum is the Matrix. It's a pure simulator that
software.
You can't even tell that you're in the simulator. So it's either the Matrix or the Terminator are like the two end goals for robotic testing.
I guess the two questions I always ask at the end are, who would you like to contact you? Usually we say that in terms of jobs. So if you are hiring someone, you want to hire a software engineer, but who do you want to hear from? If you, if someone's listening to this,
if I could hear from anybody, I would love to talk to the head of testing at Tesla or SpaceX. My observation of the universe is like, literally everything that gets manufactured has to be tested. So instead of testing, washers and widgets, like why am I not testing sports cars and spaceships, right?
So you don't want to sell them a robot so much as hear about their testing methods, or what?
I think I do. Like, I am fascinated by like these impossible to automate scenarios, and often when you're inventing some new thing, it's kind of hard. Like if you just or talking with like the Oculus Rift team, how they tested that. If you see some of their little Kickstarter videos, they've got an Oculus mounted to the end of a Universal Robots robot. Like, why are they doing that? It's probably for testing. And I bet those engineers are like they're just figuring it out, right? Like there's no book for this stuff.
And that's the thing. Like I think so many of these companies, they have test groups, but first off, test people are just usually so flat out, busy that they don't have a chance. And then no one's allowed to, especially in the hardware world, no one's allowed to talk about it because this is the magic stuff, right? This is the stuff where, this is getting the product out the door. You also see all the warts when the things don't go out the door and like,
So I have had this exact conversation with the company that bought the 10 robots. And I wagged my finger in their conference room as I was going and delivering these 10 robots. And I said, like, hey, look, hey, it would be awesome if you could talk about this someday, because like it's kind of weird being this guy doing all this stuff and I can't talk about it or any who my customers are because it's all secretive. And they're like, well, we don't want that other car company to know about it. And I'm like, well, it's probably not a trade secret.
Oh, you told me about this too, and then eventually in the software world, you said that started to come together, right?
Right. So my lesson learned from the software world is like, for automating browsers, we got Mozilla, Microsoft, Apple, Google to all kind of standardize on the W3C standard for browser automation is suspiciously identical to the Selenium WebDriver protocol. So we've done that, right? And it's not giving away a trade secret,
right? And I think that's the main thing is that like there's so much like secretive nature to it. But it's like, look, you're all doing the same thing. You're all going to benefit from this, but everybody thinks that it's like, oh no, we're so special. It's just that no one wants to take that first step. So you need that third party to come and be like, hey, what if we did this?
So I mean, I think there is a lesson learned. I think as the the eye rolling phrase, software's eating the world. I think specifically the software culture, hopefully the good parts, and software development processes. There will be more openness.
But that also is driven by money, right? I mean, like that's also like, hey, I'm going to save you money. If you all do the same thing, you save money, right?
Yeah. There's I collect weird things, but one of the things I collect is like weird robotics stories, and one of them was like T-Mobile, and it was a robotics company, and they like sued one of their vendors because someone like broke into their secret robot lab and was like stealing like how they set up the robot lab, right? It was just like a New York Times story. It came out a couple of years ago. It's an insane story, but there's a certain level you could make the argument of like, how much money were you spending on the secret robot lab for really expensive robots and all of this like secrecy when Samsung or and all these other companies are also doing the identical thing in secret and super paranoid, and really all the secrets that you're protecting are like, make a robot go to XYZ location and click this button, right? Like you could just a classic argument for open source is you could we all collaborate on the same button clicking routines, and you don't have anyway. You can kind of shift those costs anyway. So that's whoever is doing testing in secret robot labs. I'd love to talk to them. The other one though is I would love to talk to the people who worked on the Inform, like that motorized pin art project at MIT, or anyone like kind of working on that similar thing. Like, so there's this kind
of linear actuator people
doing cheap 3D printed linear actuator, like basically people who I need to find my tribe or my people in the kind of the art world of sorts, in the sense of like, my tagline for the art that I want to do more of is art you have to plug in. Stuff that
right.
like.
And doesn't just blink. Come on, blinking's great. Like Mike Harrison does great blinking
but
stuff.
I've got this thought exercise of like, what's the modern art museum going to look like in 100 years when they look back at now?
Interesting.
And I think because of all of the cheap components, thanks to the global effect of all the miniaturization and cheapness of all these parts that go into phones, you can now buy $10,000, $50,000 or 50,000 LEDs for not that much money, or little motors and all kinds of things, and make these huge projects. And
you're saying it's just a new medium that's available, kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe
a more last for 100 years though. That's the main thing.
A more dusty word is like kinetic sculpture. Like, I'm interested in like art that moves and interacts and all kinds of stuff. And I think these people are kind of all like scattered around the world. A lot of people are in San Francisco. A lot of people are in New York, in that scene of sorts. But I think there's this internet thing. Chicago's not a shabby city, but like there's a certain thing of like, I would like to find more people who want to work on those kinds of things and do that stuff. And hopefully Tapster can be an ongoing profitable entity that can let me go work on that stuff.
Yeah. Okay. How do people get a hold of you?
All right. So I'm Hugs on Twitter, Hugs. They can email me, hugs@tapster.io. You can go to tapster.io and view our amazing webpage.
I was going to say, you should add more pictures of robots. People like pictures of robots.
I think that the best criticism is that there's no video. You should never trust just a picture of a robot. Like there should be video. But you can do a YouTube search for Tapster robot. I'm trying to beef up the demos there. Specifically going down the path of trying to make more music demos. Like my favorite one was I had two Tapsters playing Heart and Soul on the iPhone GarageBand.
I've seen that. Yep.
Yeah, I need to get those on the website. Whatever. But that's like
front end work. Who does that?
Yeah. Oh, what stuff.
What about GitHub is also Hugs?
Yes. Also, yeah. So HUGS on GitHub, but also Tapster Bot is the GitHub handle there.
Got it.
The latest version of the robot, the Sidekick, I call it. That is not up there yet. Any day now. Hopefully before the end of the year, I'll get that up on the website.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks for being on here, man. We covered a lot of stuff.
Thanks. It was almost the AMP 2 hour. I don't know how you're going to edit it down here.
I won't. I won't. But we should also mention you were also talking more about the software side of things at another podcast. So if people haven't gotten enough of Jason, you can go over to Developer on Fire and listen to 287. We'll link that too.
Thanks, and thank you to everyone who's listened this whole way. You're amazing.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I will see you at the meetup on Tuesday, hopefully.
I hope so.
Yeah, and if other people in Chicago, we'll hope we'll see you there too. Thanks to all our Patreons, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.